All right. Hello, everyone. I assume I'm coming through loud and clear. So thank you all for tuning in to this Ask the Experts. Today, we have a couple of people from the product team, specifically the Azure Kubernetes service. So hopefully, if you're in this Ask the Experts, you have some questions about running Kubernetes on Azure, questions about the AKS service. And I think we're more than excited to talk to you about all of the answers to those. So I think we can jump right into some of the logistics of this call. So if you have a question, please do use the chat. We do have moderators here who will be able to feed them in. We'll try to answer most of them on this live call with some of the experts, but we also have some subject matter experts who will answer questions in the chat if we can't do it all on video. And these questions will appear up in this published section once that our moderators who are online as well filter through them. And if you see a question that you'd really like to see answered, please do upvote it. And this will help us keep some smooth sailing through all the questions that come in. And I think that is most of the lowdown there. At the very end, we'll give you some next steps and some actions that you can take. And as we go through this, please do keep in mind the session is recorded. Please try to avoid from spamming or posting anything inappropriate. And please do be aware of the Microsoft Code of Conduct. We're definitely excited to chat with everyone here today in a safe and secure manner. So I'll give everyone maybe a quick minute to read over that, but you can go find that link elsewhere. So maybe we'll bump over to the experts here today. I can start off with a quick introduction. So my name is Justin. I'm one of the PMs on the AKS team. I've worked on a couple of features that we were talking about today at Ignite. So things like Azure Policy or some node pool customizations. I'm happy to talk about those. And I'll pass it on to one of our other experts, George Palma, to give a quick intro.
Hi, folks. My name is Josh Palma. I'm one of the AKS PMs on the call. Again, I was a technical lead before. I was a program manager. I'm originally from Portugal. Kind of have a different mix background between development and operations. I've kind of carried both hats in the past, and kind of happy to answer about anything around the AKS user experience, base image, networking, as well as any fun questions on soccer and Portuguese food.
All right, thank you, George. Keiko, would you mind giving yourself a quick introduction?
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name is Keiko Harada. So previously, I was just following what George is talking. Used to work on Container Insights, incubated that, and after that, I had a great opportunity to come to AKS now, focusing on Windows AKS. So you've seen it since build this year that we GA'd. It's been very exciting road, entire journey right now. So since I'm Japanese and I thought it was interesting, so I put in Japanese food. I cook a lot, and tea ceremony and bartending. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Keiko. Kavita, would you mind giving yourself a quick intro? Actually, I think she might have some connection problems, but maybe she'll drop in a minute. So I think there's a healthy amount of questions already coming in. So what do you say we get started? So I think we've got a good first one here. So maybe this is a good one for you, George. The question is there a plan for the portal to become feature compatible with the Kubernetes dashboard and what you can do through kubectl?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the short answer is yes and no. So the portal capabilities will definitely increase and become very, very close to the Kubernetes dashboard. We don't obviously intend to replace anything, and kubectl will definitely be still be useful in most situations, especially obviously if you're using the CLI or if you're doing any kind of script. We do want to have a very complete portal experience that touches all the base Kubernetes components and allows you to kind of explore them, manage them, troubleshoot if you're doing, and we really want to make that experience optimized for folks that are testing, they are developing, and they are troubleshooting their environments really quickly. Obviously, for production, we still expect that you'll be leveraging some of the best practices along obviously CI/CD and pull and push based deployments.
Yeah, it's a great question, a great answer as well. I think one more piece of info there is you might have seen some of the changes for the built-in Kubernetes dashboard, which you can use in AKS. I think the long-term plans there are to move over to this portal experience that we've recently released. So hopefully that gives you some better context around the plans there. So I think we'll jump over to the next question. There's a nice healthy amount coming in here. And I think this is a good one for you, George, as well. Do you have any recommendations about using an Azure Backup service with Kubernetes persistent volumes? And any insight into, I guess, the use of Azure Backup with AKS would be really interesting to hear about.
Yeah, definitely. That's an area that we're looking at very closely right now. Today, we definitely recommend solutions like Valero. They are there and do a great job at leveraging the native Kubernetes snapshot capabilities and allow you to kind of go across clusters and do some backup in DR as well. We are working with the Azure Backup team as well to provide that capability natively from Azure, and we are working on that as we speak, and we hope to have some news there real soon.
Awesome, thank you. And so, Keiko, I think we've got some good questions about Windows. So we have a question here about the Windows containers feature with AKS. Can you talk a little bit about how that works, maybe a little bit on the technical side, and is it production ready today?
Sure, that's a good question. Today, so I kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier. We've started our journey in 2015, talking about Windows container creation. And it's been a really good journey for us. First started with the containers. We ourselves actually created it in 2016, introduced it to Kubernetes. So we had so Kubernetes ran on kubelet and kubeproxy on Windows for the first time in 2016. And then after that, we're able to produce it as a stable release on Windows at 2019. And during that same year in May, we released it in build. So how it works is that, and then one more thing is that we went GA this April at build. So this is pretty exciting for us. We've actually had a lot of customers asking for it. So how does it work? Actually, whenever we talk about Windows AKS, a lot of customers think that it's a holistically different type of AKS that's run everything on Windows, and it's actually not. It's a Windows node pool support that we actually do. And this is something that I get questioned a lot. So again, if you're running AKS, you're going to still have a Linux worker node as a primary that has all the kube system, because again, AKS was originally created with Linux, and then later on it came with the Windows support, Windows Server support. Today we support Windows Server 2019 process isolated containers. Within that development and all that, just like a high level, we work really close with the Windows container team. And I know this time at Ignite we've done an announcement about AKS HCI, so it's the same team. We work very heavily with them, as well as we also work within the CNCF SIG to make sure that we contribute back into the Kubernetes community of whatever we do with Windows, to make sure that even if the Windows work that we're doing, people might think it's really proprietary and all that, it's really something that we're sharing with the community. We're bringing it to the upstream. We're bringing it to the SIG nodes and SIG windows. And then after that, once it's approved, we're developing it there with the community, we bring it back into AKS. So more or less, I just wanted to kind of reiterate that it's pretty close to what we do with Linux, and we're making sure that we're with the community rather than doing something proprietary. Sorry, it's kind of like a mouthful, but I hope that actually kind of helps some of this.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Keiko, for kind of elaborating a bit on the history of it. I think that's useful as well. So we've got another question here. So here is a question that, mentioning AKS has distinguished itself by a lot of service integration across Azure. And are there any new integrations that have happened with AKS and other Azure services? I think there's two that come to mind. So one of them I can talk a little bit about, which is our integration with Azure Policy. This feature has gone GA as of this week, and it's currently rolling out across all regions. So the premise here was mentioned by Brendan in his blog post about, what have we shipped around Ignite? And I think the crux is basically you have a lot of new resources that need to be audited and need to be compliant, and they're all living in this layer at the Kubernetes level. So you can use Azure Policy today and even previously to basically secure and audit any resources which are at the Azure level. So maybe it was VMs, maybe it was storage accounts, but in the Kubernetes world, you have your pods and maybe persistent volumes. How do I ensure that those are compliant and doing things that aren't against my company policy? So that's really where this add-on steps in. And with this capability, you're able to use a lot of functionality that was available in pod security policy. So there's an Azure policy to actually let you limit deployment of privileged containers. You can set a policy to only pull images from certain registries. And you can also change the effects of it. So you can deny any requests that come into your control plane from ever getting deployed or ever getting acknowledged. But you can also set an audit policy. So if something does go through and you don't want to block it up front, you can actually go and look at a compliance report and see what's running against compliance. And this gives you a little bit more observability about how your infrastructure is being used. So I think another really great integration that we've had this week is Azure RBAC for Kubernetes. So George, do you want to maybe hit a quick note on that?
Definitely. So the Azure RBAC integration for Kubernetes authorization is definitely something that we just announced the public preview now from kind of a limited preview that we were doing over the summer. And it's something that we were pretty excited about because it really allows you to, with very simple commands, to kind of have an at-scale view and management of your permissions. So as most of you might know, Kubernetes has its own RBAC capabilities, and you are able to just essentially create your roles and role bindings and then give that to specific users or groups. And if you're leveraging the Azure AD integration, you can give that and associate that to specific Azure AD users or identities or groups. And then you basically have to replicate that configuration across clusters in order for you to basically expand that to everyone. With the integration and the linkage between Azure RBAC and Kubernetes RBAC, what you're essentially achieving is the ability to go to your Azure subscription and essentially be able to give your, say, developers team a read access to a specific set of clusters or a specific set of namespaces at scale without having to actually go ahead and deploy all those role bindings and roles into each one of the clusters, and will allow you to much more easily, again, to centralize your management of authentication and authorization, all in Azure, all in the Azure portal, and all with Azure RBAC.
Awesome stuff. And I think, George, we've got another good one for you. We've got a question from Richard Hooper, who I think is a very active MVP, so thanks for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about ACR Teleport? I think this is a pretty awesome use case that you could probably speak to.
Yeah, and hi, Richard. Richard's awesome. Glad to have you here. So yeah, that's another one that we are really excited about. So Teleport is a capability that the Azure Container Registry team has been working on for some time now, and it's now already integrated into a few of their product lines. And we are working with them right now to integrate that into AKS. For those of you that might not know what exactly Teleport does, it's as close as you can get from essentially image pooling magic, because it really allows you to leverage the best of the Azure infrastructure to speed up your image pool times and reduce the amount of time that you need to spend, for example, extracting images or pulling them out over the wire by effectively just mounting them directly and already expanded. And so your image pool time, especially for larger images, which is, again, a big part of your application scaling and the cluster scaling side as well, will be considerably reduced with the usage of Teleport by leveraging this new mechanism.
Awesome stuff. And I think we've got another great question here. Maybe Keiko, if you can speak to it. What are your thoughts on Bluegreen deployments? Is this a necessary pattern that customers should adopt? And how do you kind of think about upgrading clusters, keeping in mind some configs can only be defined at create time. I think you're muted.
I'm muted, and sorry,
Nice.
can you repeat the last piece because you broke up?
Yeah, so the last piece was just, how do you think about upgrading clusters, keeping in mind some functionality is only configured at create time?
Oh, that's a really good one. So originally for the Bluegreen piece, definitely, I would recommend you should definitely do that because especially with modern application, you need to understand what is it that you need to upgrade. So in other words, like, as we're going into this microservices, containers and microservices world, most of the time the application itself, you could modify it, and time is actually an essence. So again, Bluegreen definitely helps having like a different type of, it's like an A/B switch development for that. And in terms of the cluster upgrade itself, creation time, is this for Linux or Windows?
I think both are fair game.
Yeah. So cluster creation, so cluster upgrade, I would definitely look into, so again, you definitely need to look into any type of like, especially with the Kubernetes versions, so what is it supported and compatibility and all that. Most of the time we make sure that the compatibility is there, but again, you would need to kind of take a look at it. In terms of the creation piece, yeah, I don't think we actually have any issues, but sorry.
All right, great. So yeah, I think one other piece I'll add there is we've intentionally designed this addition of multiple node pools to facilitate some of this. So if you need to, let's say, flight a new version of Kubernetes, you're able to actually create a brand new node pool on that version, flight out your application, see if it's healthy before rolling it across the rest of your cluster. So I think it is a best practice if you're able to, one, upgrade often, and most of the times being able to upgrade often means you have some stable method of reliably testing. Is this going to break me and is it not? And so Bluegreen ends up being one of those options, but certainly not the only option. So hopefully that helps. And I know we have some chat experts here as well who can probably lend some advice also on the chat. So let's bump over to some new questions. So let's see. Maybe this is a good question for you, George. Can you talk a little bit about how we're thinking about supporting IP addresses and the use of it with Azure CNI, and if we plan to support multiple IP addresses per pod for Azure CNI?
Yeah, so there's a few streams of work that we're doing now with the container networking team, and that we expect to have some news there very, very soon over the next couple of months, which is we're effectively creating a mode. We know that on Azure CNI, one of the biggest concerns is the consumption of IPs that it requires from your network. So obviously the IPs from each pod come from the same network that your nodes are in. So it's not working kind of that overlay network that, for example, KubeNet works on, and that can put a lot of strain in your network planning and a lot of strain in your network usage, even especially if you're peering that cluster with different subnets, different VNets, on-prem, etc. And what we're doing is we're creating a new mode for CNI that will actually allow you to go around that by essentially allowing you to pass different subnets into the pod cider, as well as later on passing different VNets and kind of creating a bit of that overlay model for CNI itself that will allow you to not consume any IPs from your on-prem ranges or your peered ranges. And so it will still have all the advantages of CNI by the fact that these are actually being delivered by the Azure network stack, and that you don't need to do any sort of IP forwarding or route tabling, but you'll be able to not consume IPs directly that might otherwise conflict with your address spaces. We are looking a bit into the possibility, I think that was the last part of the question, of having different NICs or different IPs per pod. That is something that we're still exploring. We're always looking for new use cases. So please drop us a line on GitHub in our issues, and we're happy to kind of get that conversation going and understand a bit more about your use case and how we can support it.
Awesome stuff. And I think that's actually a good segue, George. So If I'm a new customer to AKS, how can I kind of stay in the loop with what's going on? If there's new features or maybe a feature that I want to see, is there any way for me to kind of have that conversation with the product team?
Yes, we absolutely love that interaction. It's one of the things that that really motivates us, is the ability to connect with every single one of you and with every one of our users. The very easy, hopefully easy way for you to do that is, one, follow up our release notes that we publish every week or every other week on our GitHub. So AKS has a GitHub repository where we essentially publish any announcements, all the weekly release notes, as well as we have our public roadmap there. So you can check out every feature that we're working on right now, every feature that is in preview right now, every feature that we just GA, as well as everything that is coming later on the pipeline. And we use our issue system, so the GitHub issue system, to essentially discuss every enhancement, every feature, or every topic that you might want to discuss with us. Just go ahead, open an issue there, and we're going to jump into that and discuss it with you in terms of trying to understand your use case, your feature request, or your concern, and have a discussion there.
Awesome stuff. Thank you, George. I think here's another great question about migration and maybe Windows services specifically. Keiko, could you speak to any guidance, documentation, or checklists that people could look to when considering a migration over to AKS, maybe if it's Windows or even Linux workloads?
Sure, definitely. One thing I would definitely look at is capacity sizing and whatnot. And also if there's any dependencies, like just said, Justin, sorry, I've turned my camera on. Okay. So one thing is, for Windows, we do have an application called, and we've announced it at Ignite as well too, called Windows Admin Center. And there's an extension for containers that we're working heavily close with the Windows container team. And for that one, what you could do is, if you have an application that's running on a bare VM, you could take that and then containerize it. This tool itself helps you to containerize, as well as provide you to push it into ACR. So later on, if you need to actually pull that like images, you could pull that and then run it into your AKS Windows server. So more or less for migration, definitely one thing is, think about how do you want to containerize it? Because again, do you want to, and we've seen customers that actually does both things. Like I just said with lift and shift, do you want to just lift and shift and then actually bring it exactly as is? But if you're going to do that, make sure that you actually understand your sizing and what's the limits on the resourcing. Second piece that we are also seeing with customers, again, this could be with Linux or Windows, is that you have a monolithic application and it could be on microservices as well too, that you just happen to actually run it, but it may not be containerized. How do I actually continue, in order to look into again, going back into the modern application, how do I carve that chunk of functionalities and then containerize it and then push it in? And these are some of the efforts that we're starting to see with customers doing with migration. So definitely, make sure you understand your architecture. Like, do you want to do lift and shift, modern application? If so, lift and shift, definitely size it and then see how much you actually need. What's the density that you wanted to populate with your VM, and how does it grow? Second of all, with the modern application, if you're going to carve it, make sure that you understand what you're carving, how does it actually works, because these applications may need to actually, how do they need to communicate within the cluster on AKS, which will differ significantly on how you would originally do it with monolithic. So there's multiple areas that you need to look at, but definitely sizing, scale, as well as architecture of the application. And architecture of the application, we do have really good documentation, like baseline documentation for AKS. That's on the that's on our website.
All right, thank you, Keiko. And I think, George, you beat me to the punch with some chat answers, but I think this Azure Files NFS support is pretty awesome. Could you talk a little bit more about it and how it might address some of the concerns that this question originally asked for?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so happy for it that I went right ahead and paste the link there for everyone that wants to check it out. So this is actually right out of the gate something that we're going to publish. We just published this week on the release notes. If you're kind of as a segue from my last comment. So if you check the release notes, you'll see that we now support both the NFS integration for Azure Files as well as shared disks. So it's two new things that we have on our CSI storage drivers preview that we're looking for you to test out. And this is basically a new integration from Azure Files that effectively will support POSIX compliant systems and will be a great news for folks that require POSIX compliant file systems and that want things that like WordPress or other systems that do a lot of random writes and reads and need at the same time to have that shared across multiple pods and multiple nodes. This should be great news for those folks, and we're super happy to be in the front line of that support since it was just announced last week.
Awesome stuff. So I think, we're coming into the last mile of this. I think we have until 2:15, so maybe we can hit one or two more questions. I think most of these have been answered to a decent degree, but here's one, and this is free. So this question is, would you recommend to rely on application gateway and or front door to handle TLS and avoid encryption between AKS and the ingress point? George, how do you feel about speaking a little bit to this? Maybe some of the trade-offs between app gateway and front door and other ingress options.
Yeah, it's one of those questions. First of all, it's a good question, and it's one of those where the answer always kind of drives towards it depends type of answer, because it's all about kind of your architecture, your workload needs, and I could put a lot of more questions here. So instead of that, I'm going to kind of try and give some examples and answer. If your workload, for example, requires that you terminate your TLS within the cluster, so for example, very close to the application, then probably that's not a good setup for you. You might want to terminate, for example, on an ingress controller that is running inside the cluster. If that's something that you are happy to terminate kind of at the Azure infrastructure level, that you're happy to terminate at the VNet level, then that's definitely something that you should look into, especially because of the trade-offs between both. So if you're doing that at the ingress controller level, that's something that is very close to your application, but it's also something that you need to manage and configure yourself. While if you're doing it at the Azure front door level, at the app gateway level, obviously that's something that is a service that Azure provides. It scales for you and handles all of those features for you, and it's something that you can offload into Azure for doing. So as long as that kind of meets your requirements, that is normally something that I'm happy to recommend. But in many cases, you might actually want to take on that task and might want to actually configure that termination either at the ingress controller level or even at the pod level. And that's something that you can definitely do as well.
Awesome stuff. I think we can maybe hit one more quick question. George Todd has a question about some of the goal dates for GA for some of this NFS for files work.
Yeah, there's no concrete GA date yet from the Azure Files, so we expect basically to be GAing very close to their GA date as well. There's obviously the detail here that this support for NFS is coming in the CSI storage drivers feature set as well. So that obviously requires that feature set to be GA2. We're currently looking at around Kubernetes 1.20 to have that fully GA'd on AKS or along that time frame where AKS GAs that Kubernetes version. But obviously that also depends that the feature itself within storage GAs, but I think both timelines will be very close aligned. So over the next few months, you'll see that evolve since the preview was just announced, evolve during preview, and then we expect that maybe a quarter or so will go into GA.
Awesome stuff. I think that brings us to the closure of the Q&A portion. Thank you all so much for giving us all these great questions. I think Richard actually made a great call out. We actually have regular office hours that people can come to. Talented field team attends. And so if you have more questions, please feel free to drop by that. If we can just bump the slide one more page, I think we can hand off some good links. So As George mentioned, we do have a public roadmap and an issue page, and you can go here to actually talk about existing features, questions, or make feature requests. So please do come by and say hi on that page. But also on that roadmap page, there is a link to this office hours. So if you're interested in having a further conversation about Bluegreen deployments or ingress controllers, I think that's a great forum to come in and get some advice. The last piece I'll say is Brendan has a great blog post which captures a lot of what we've shipped this week. Please go and check that out. It's pretty insightful, and it's always fun to see a recap of what has been shipped recently. So on that note, thank you all so much for coming. We greatly appreciate your time, and we always chat with you. So please don't be strangers and come visit us on GitHub. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, everyone.